if Iran doesn't agree to a nuclear deal. Quote, if they don't make a deal, there will be bombing, and it will be bombing the likes of which they have never seen before.
Iran is not very happy about American B-2 bombers and bunker busters sitting right at Iranian doorstep. And that's why Iran is now threatening to attack US bases and US soldiers. Pentagon is not sitting just idly by in the face of these threats. It seems that another aircraft carrier is making its way from Pacific to the Middle East, and that's USS Carl Vinson. Tensions are running extremely high in the Middle East, so let's go over what exactly happened in the last 2 days, starting with Trump's new comments.
President Trump threatening to bomb Iran today after the country rejected his invitation to negotiate directly on Iran's nuclear program. But the president, he didn't stop there, saying he's, quote, pissed off at one of the world's most powerful leaders.
My big preference is we work it out with Iran. But if we don't work it out, bad things are going to happen to Iran.
President Trump warning Iran what's at stake Friday and ramping up threats today, telling NBC News if Iran doesn't make a deal, there will be bombing like they've never seen before. The threat from President Trump coming a day after Iran rejected direct negotiations with the U.S. and marks an increasingly aggressive tone taken by the president towards Tehran in the last month.
We're down to final strokes with Iran. That's going to be an interesting time. And we'll see what happens. But we're down to the final moments. We're at final moments. You can't let them have a nuclear weapon. I'd rather see a peace deal than the other, but the other will solve the problem.
Maybe Iran could ignore rhetoric like this if it was just words alone. But Trump has backed up his warning with action. Before moving forward, if you guys can please hit that subscribe button down below to keep up with all the geopolitical news like this one. Let's begin. Just a week ago, US has moved around 7 B-2 bombers, roughly 30% of our B-2 fleet, to the Indian Ocean Diego Garcia base. This base is right outside Iranian ballistic missile range, but it's close enough that B-2s can take off, destroy Iranian bunkers storing nuclear facilities, and come back safely.
In the meantime, the U.S. is noticeably building an armada of B-2 and B-52 bombers in the Indian Ocean at the joint U.S.-UK base of Diego Garcia.
Keep in mind the B-2 bomber was essentially built specifically to bomb the nuclear facilities in Iran. They have the capability of lifting what they call a massive ordnance penetrator, the largest bunker buster bomb the United States possesses.
CBN News military analyst Chuck Holton says President Trump's statements are unprecedented.
The real question is, President Trump has said that if Iran does not come to the negotiating table within 2 months, that there will be military strikes. He said that repeatedly, not even equivocating at all. That there will be military strikes on Iran. That's something the United States has not done before, so this would be pretty historic.
Iran announced they would attack the base if the U.S. takes military action against Iran. On Sunday, Iran's supreme leader called for the destruction of Israel.
It's a religious, moral, and human duty for everyone to work toward removing this wicked, criminal entity from the region.
Now, Iranian leadership knows just how powerful B-2 bombers are. You see, just 6 months ago, on October 16, 2024, 2 B-2 stealth bombers took off from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. They flew 15 hours straight to Yemen, struck 5 targets, destroying underground weapons depots similar to Iranian nuclear facilities. Then, both bombers turned around and flew another 15 hours straight back to Missouri. They did all this while being completely undetected to enemy's radar. This mission was a clear message to Iran. Our B-2s can reach your nuclear facilities whenever we want. And now Trump has moved 30% of our B-2 bomber fleet to the Indian Ocean. Here's more details on this report. This is important because B-2 is the only aircraft that can deliver the massive GBU-57, one of the only bombs that can destroy Iran's nuclear facility at Natanz and Fordow. Right now, the bomber fleet is stationed at Diego Garcia Air Base, which is roughly 2,000 miles from Iran, making it an ideal location. Far enough to give the US Navy time and space to defend its strategic B-2 bombers from Iranian missiles and drones, and yet close enough for B-2 to strike targets deep within Iran. Carrying two GBU-57 bombs that weigh over 13 tons each, the B-2 has a range of over 45,000 miles. The 9 KC-135 air refueling tankers also stationed at Diego Garcia give the stealth bomber the range to conduct bombing raids on Iran from any direction. Over 100 US F-35, F-15, and F-18 fighters are stationed in the UAE, Qatar, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and abroad the USS Truman. All can strike targets inside Iran. A surprise attack against Iran could quickly devastate its nuclear and ballistic missile sites. Iran possesses a vast arsenal of ballistic missiles and drones, but these are limited in range and must be programmed with precise coordinates. If US keeps its assets well protected or frequently relocates them, Iran would struggle to strike effectively. Now this last part is the important one because many people do claim that Iran is not really our enemy, and that's just not true. Either they are misinformed or they are spreading misinformation. Because Iran chants death to America every single day in their parliament. And here we have Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, who has vowed to destroy America, clarifying the slogan that Iran chants, death to America. He says that it's not a slogan, it's a policy. This is as clear as it gets. Watch the clip yourself.
The
situation between America and Iran is this. When you chant death to America, it is not just a slogan, it is a policy. I have stated the reasons previously. For many years, from the 1940s to the 1970s, that is 30 years, the Americans did everything they could do against the Iranian nation. They hit Iran any way they could, financially, economically, politically, scientifically, and morally. If it were not for America's support, if it were not for the support of US weapons, the corrupt and artificial Zionist regime would have been destroyed in the first week. It would have collapsed.
The
Americans are behind this. In Western countries, in England, France, Italy, and various US states, people took to the streets in large numbers, chanting slogans against Israel and in many cases, against America. This tarnished Western reputation. They really do not have any remedy for this. They cannot make excuses for this. That is why we saw some idiot saying that Iran was behind the rallies in England. Perhaps the Basij of London is behind this, or maybe the Basij of Paris.
Iran has also come out with its own warning ever since we have moved more of our firepower to Middle East and Western Asia. Here we have statement from Tehran Times, a state-owned media if I'm not incorrect, but this is what they said. Iran's hypersonic ballistic missiles are loaded onto launchers in secure underground missile bases and are ready to launch against all US bases in the Middle East, including Diego Garcia. Now this is a perfect example of it's easier to make threats, but it's harder to execute them. Because in reality, Iran doesn't really have any ballistic missiles that have the range to reach Diego Garcia, as you can see from this report here. The IRGC Aerospace has no ballistic missile capable of reaching Diego Garcia from Iran, which is roughly 2,000 miles, 3,800 kilometers. Their threats about targeting the airbase and B-2 bombers are empty. They currently have absolutely no capabilities of targeting the island. And this is the exact reason why we stationed the B-2 fleet at that island. It's at the Iranian doorstep, meaning it's out of their reach, it's out of their sphere of influence or range of missiles. This is exactly why Iran has also promised to target other US bases that we have in the Middle East. Here we have a statement from Iranian Supreme Leader that came out just few hours before I started recording. An attack from the outside is unlikely, but if they make a mistake, they will certainly suffer a heavy blow. Now, this likely refers to Iranian ability to attack a US base. They did this back in 2020 when Trump eliminated Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian major general, and in return, or in revenge, I guess, in retaliation, Iran attacked US bases in Middle East. Iran fired more than a dozen ballistic missiles at 2 American bases in Iraq that were housing US forces, but no casualties or death were reported because of this strike. It was all but a show of retaliation. Now, that's not to say that Iran doesn't have capabilities to deal a bigger blow to US bases in Middle East. In fact, just a few days ago, Iran published their own promotional video, I guess, where they showed off a new missile city that they had just built. Here's more details on that. Now, this can definitely escalate, and that's why there are other options on the table when it comes to dealing with Iran. And one of that is putting tariffs on countries that are supporting the Iranian economy and Iranian nuclear facilities, basically. So what this would mean that if China is buying oil from Iran, Trump would slap a 25% tariff on top of all the tariff China already has. So there would be another 25% tariff that China would have. And because of that, all the exports coming out of China will be extremely expensive to bring it into the US market. Here's Trump sharing more details on that.
We'll get that done. And the Middle East, a lot of things are happening with respect to Iran. And we'll see if we can get something done. And if not, it's going to be a bad situation. Very, very bad.
Oil sanctions that you mentioned today, when will they start?
So we have a couple. We have the secondary tariffs on Iran, and we'll probably give it a couple of weeks. And if we don't see any progress, we're going to put them on. We're not putting them on right now, but if you remember, I did that 6 years ago, and it worked very well, to put it mildly. And if the election weren't rigged, you would have a situation where there would be no problem with Iran today. But it was. Biden didn't know what he was doing, obviously. And we have a very rough situation in the Middle East because of that. You ended up with October 7th. And you would have never had October 7th. And you would have never had Russia going into Ukraine likewise. But we're going to make a decision on secondary tariffs on Iran based on whether or not they're going to make a deal. If they're going to make a deal, then we're never going to put secondary.
In fact, US is already starting implementing this strategy. US has sanctioned first Chinese teapot refinery over links to dealing with Iran. This refinery is named Shandong Shaogong Luking Petrochemical Company. I'm sure I mispronounced that, but we'll show it on the screen. It's not one of the largest processor in China, but it is one of the largest companies that's dealing with Iran. In fact, the US Treasury Department says that this company has purchased millions of barrels of Iranian oil valued at approximately $500 million. For an economy like Iran's, that's a lot of money, and getting hit with these sanctions is definitely going to be a big blow for the Chinese company and Iran's economy. This seems to be just a taste of things to come if Iran doesn't come to the negotiating table, and this is something that Putin may be forced to deal with, because Trump has made it clear that if Putin doesn't come to the table, Putin will be hit with the same secondary sanctions, where Trump will not be targeting Russia or Russian economy itself, but rather going after allies who are supporting the Russian war efforts. So Trump will put tariffs on countries like China, India, who are buying Russian oil and pumping money into the Russian economy so Putin can continue this war. Once these countries face the risk of tariffs, they will be more careful or full-on reject buying Russian oil, because at the end of the day, they need the US market way more than they need the Russian oil. Here were Trump's comments on this.
Just hours ago, President Trump called me to tell me he is, quote, pissed off with Russia's President Putin and threatened to impose secondary tariffs on Russia's oil. Quote, if Russia and I are unable to make a deal on stopping the bloodshed in Ukraine, and if I think it was Russia's fault, which it might not be, but if I think it was Russia's fault, I am going to put secondary tariffs on all oil coming out of Russia. Mr. Trump said 25% tariffs on Russian oil could happen any moment and told me he plans to speak with President Putin this week. The president told me, quote, I was very angry, pissed off when Putin started getting into Zelensky's credibility and started talking about new leadership in Ukraine.
Do you say your relationship with Vladimir Putin is at its lowest point right now?
No, I don't think so. I don't think he's going to go back on his word. You're talking about Putin. I don't think he's going to go back on his word. I've known him for a long time. We've always gotten along well, despite the Russia hoax. It's a hoax created by Clinton and Schiff and all of these lunatics. And that really was a dangerous point. That was a very dangerous thing they did to this country. It was a pure, unadulterated scam, hoax. But no, I think he'll be okay.
YouTube just dropped a mind-boggling announcement. It is paying creators $64 million per day. Why? Well, because YouTube doesn't have enough creators right now. That's why you see videos on your homepage that have less than 1,000 views, like this one. Now, of course, that doesn't mean everyone should start a channel. But if you have ever wondered about starting a YouTube channel or a faceless channel, now is the perfect time. YouTube is paying creators millions every single day, and it's pushing newer and smaller channels now more than ever. But I'm sure you have many questions on how to start and grow a channel. I get these questions in my email all the time from some of you guys. That's why we have decided to put all our YouTube advice into one training bootcamp for completely free. So if you're someone interested in starting your own YouTube channel, you can sign up for this bootcamp by clicking the link in the description or scanning the QR code on your screen. This bootcamp is like a Zoom call, so it is limited to 100 people at a time. So be sure to sign up before it gets full. Now back to the video. I know you called this at the beginning of the war too, where Russia is clearly not going to stop at Ukraine if it doesn't face resistance. And recently, just I think in the last few days, we had announcements from Poland first, where they're stationing 11,000 troops on the border with Belarus. And Lithuania plans to just mine the whole border they have with Belarus and Russia, just, defensive measures. And Polish Prime Minister said that maybe Poland should seek nuclear protection since NATO deterrence is probably getting weaker with the new US administration. Do you think now that US is pulling back from NATO a little bit, the world will become like, we'll have more and more countries looking towards nuclear proliferation?
Well, this is an excellent point. This is one of the downsides, or the potential downsides, of perceived U.S. disengagement. If nations are not confident that the United States will provide the nuclear deterrent, we're not talking about U.S. troops on the ground, we're talking about nuclear deterrence against Russia. If nations, they look at Russia, they see the threat from Russia, they see that if Ukraine is allowed to fail, that Russia will be at their door in the next 2 or 3 years, then they, of course, are going to worry about having a nuclear deterrent. France has several hundred nuclear warheads, as does the UK. The French have always maintained a sovereignty over their nuclear weapons, whereas the UK is part of NATO and the US nuclear planning group. So if the U.S. were to back away from this commitment, and I actually don't think we will, but if we did, then you would not have. There would be a huge disadvantage in terms of numbers, but I don't think you have to match Russia warhead for warhead to have a nuclear deterrent. The Russians just have to believe that the French and or the Brits would use a nuclear weapon if necessary. So, but because of all this uncertainty, you can imagine why Poland and some other countries are beginning to ask the question, do we need to have our own? And that would be a shame. That would be a diplomatic failure for the United States, that now nations would break the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty because they felt they had no choice.
Yep, and I know we're getting close to the end, so I'll just have this last question, and it relates to Middle East a little bit. Trump has started basically making sure that Houthis from Yemen cannot attack commercial ships. Do you think that could be successful without putting U.S. boots on the ground, considering how the Middle East fighting goes on?
Yeah, I don't know what plans U.S. Central Command has developed, nor should I know how they would plan to do this. I don't know how they're going to do this. We have tried the approach of missile strikes against known Houthi locations. We have escorted. We've had the great U.S. Navy and the Royal Navy and others allies out in the Red Sea, trying to protect shipping, launching strikes against Houthis. But I think that the only way you really eliminate the Houthis as a threat is you have to eliminate Iran, so that Iran cannot support them. And the way you do that, of course, is by defeating Russia, because Iran has no real friend other than Russia. So if you defeat Russia, Iran is isolated, much weaker, and then they are less capable of helping the Houthis. So I think a strategic approach that involves defeating Russia first is the way to do it. We've got many years of experience fighting against different terrorist organizations in the Middle East, and you can't just kill your way out of it. You can kill a lot of them, but that does not necessarily solve the problem.